Hi everyone, my name is Melissa van Dijk, and in today's video I want to show you what the most logical food pattern would look like inside the fluid pressure model for acne breakouts. So the most logical structure here would be a carbohydrate-rich, potassium-rich whole food diet built around foods that naturally contain very little sodium. Because if excess sodium creates the background conditions that allow fluid pressure to build in the skin, then the first goal would be to remove that excess sodium. But at the same time, your body still needs energy, glycogen, and somewhere for the water to go. And that is where low sodium carbohydrates become so important. So most of your energy would come from foods such as rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, taro, oats, plantains, corn, bananas, and other foods that are less likely to create a strong digestive fluid shift, such as oranges, mandarins, pineapple, and strawberries. So essentially, it is exactly the opposite of what you're usually told about acne breakouts. Carbohydrates and sugar are constantly blamed, so you may begin removing rice, potatoes, and fruit while adding much more eggs, cheese, nuts, meat, and protein products. But inside the fluid pressure model, that moves the diet in exactly the wrong direction. The problem is not carbohydrates as they naturally occur. It is what happens after the food industry combines those carbohydrates with large amounts of salt. Take rice for example. Rice is naturally very low in sodium, so the rice itself is not a problem. But rice with soy sauce or stock powder is. So let's say you add 1 tablespoon of soy sauce on top of the rice, which is fairly common because plain rice generally tastes blunt. But what tastes blunt to you is simply the rice in its natural state. And if you're coming from a high sodium diet, that is exactly how it will taste at first. But by adding that 1 tablespoon of commercial soy sauce, you can easily add around 600 to 1000 milligrams of sodium to rice that naturally contained almost none. And the same thing happens with potatoes. They are naturally very low in sodium, but if you turn them into a baked potato covered with cheese, they are no longer low in sodium. So the foundation would be carbohydrates as they naturally occur before salt, sauces, and processed ingredients are added to them. Inside the model, these carbohydrates help the muscles and liver store glycogen and the water that comes with it, while removing added sodium reduces the amount of water being held outside the cells. So in other words, the carbohydrates remain, but the sodium-heavy environment surrounding them disappears. Then protein would still be included, but it would complement the carbohydrate rather than becoming the center of every meal. So again, this is almost the opposite of what you have been told. The protein could come from eggs, fresh fish, fresh meat, milk, plain yogurt, and perhaps beans, chickpeas, or lentils when they digest comfortably. And the major distinction here would be fresh rather than preserved. So for example, a piece of fresh salmon instead of smoked salmon, fresh meat instead of ham, eggs instead of bread layered with cheese and processed meat. These foods naturally contain some sodium, so no added salt does not mean the diet contains literally no sodium. It means removing the concentrated sodium that comes from preservation, sauces, seasoning mixtures, and processed food. Food would become a normal source of energy, carbohydrate, potassium, and water. It would no longer be treated as a small garnish that needs nuts, nut butter, or protein added before it counts as proper food. You could include vegetables according to your appetite as well as preference, but they would not need to take the place of the starch. And fat would still be present naturally through eggs, fish, meat, milk, and perhaps avocado if tolerated. The diet would naturally become much lower in added fat, but that does not mean it would contain no fat at all. It simply stops treating extra fat as something every meal needs, whether it comes from nuts, nut butter, cheese, dressings, or so-called healthy fat snacks. So breakfast could be oats with milk and banana. Lunch could be plain rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, or taro with fresh fish, eggs or meat, along with fruit, vegetables or legumes when tolerated. And dinner could essentially follow the same structure, just in a different variation. All of these meals could also be eaten interchangeably. So lunch could be eaten for breakfast, breakfast could be eaten for dinner, and dinner could become lunch. And there is no correct order here, because these are simply whole foods. You can eat them whenever you want them. And if you genuinely need a snack, it could simply be fruit, leftovers, milk, or another simple whole food rather than a bar, nuts, or manufactured protein product. Flavor could come from herbs, spices, lemon, garlic, and fresh ingredients, rather than stock cubes, soy sauce, fish sauce, bottled dressings, and seasoning mixtures. And the goal would be to add as little extra salt as possible and leave the foods largely as they are. Now, that does not mean that adding a few flakes to one dish here and there would suddenly destroy the entire pattern. The problem is when salt is added automatically to the rice, the eggs, the potatoes, and the vegetables, and then added again through sauces, dressings, or seasoning mixtures. A small amount here and there can still fit, but routinely adding salt to almost every food simply recreates the sodium-heavy background you are trying to remove. And that is essentially the most logical food pattern inside the fluid pressure model. It is a carbohydrate-rich, potassium-rich whole food diet with no routine addition of salt or sodium-heavy processed ingredients. So it is not a low-carbohydrate diet, it is not low in sugar, and it is not a salt and nuts all day. And it is not an increasingly complicated collection of foods assembled to reach nutritional targets. It is simply carbohydrates as they naturally occur, combined with suitable fresh foods. The idea is that carbohydrates help store water inside the muscles and liver, while removing excess sodium reduces the amount of water being held outside the cells. So temporary digestive fluid shifts would not be happening on top of a system that is already carrying a large sodium load. This is still my theory, which I developed after more than 2.5 years of testing it on myself, and for me it has consistently worked this way. So I hope that these examples helped you understand what the food pattern would actually look like. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!